The classroom buzzed with the soft sounds of pencils scratching against paper, little whispers floating like feathers in the air. It was a typical Tuesday morning at Maplewood Elementary, and Mrs. Alvarez's first-grade class was in the middle of their weekly spelling test. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows, dancing on the floor and casting soft shadows over tiny desks lined in neat rows. The walls were bright, covered with cheerful posters, smiling cartoon animals, big bold letters of the alphabet, and colorful numbers. Mrs. Alvarez moved quietly between the desks, her sensible shoes making little sound on the tiled floor. She peeked over shoulders, offered an encouraging smile here, a gentle nod there. Her students were only 6 or 7 years old, still learning how to sit still, how to spell simple words like cat and sun. Most of them were hunched over their paper's lips, moving silently as they tried to remember each letter. Then she noticed Lucas. He was a quiet boy with a mop of messy brown hair and wide eyes that usually sparkled with curiosity. He was one of those kids who always had a question, always eager to learn, always the first to laugh at something silly. But today, something was off. He sat unusually still at his desk, his small body tense, his eyes glued to the paper in front of him, but he hadn't written a single word. His pencil was clenched tightly in his hand, knuckles pale, and he seemed to be holding his breath. Mrs. Alvarez paused, watching him from across the room. Maybe he was just nervous. Maybe he forgot how to spell something and didn't want to get it wrong. She decided to wait a few more minutes before checking in. She continued her slow walk around the room, collecting completed tests and whispering small praises to the kids who handed them in. When she finally reached Lucas's desk, she noticed right away. His paper was nearly blank. No cat, no dog, no sun, just one small sentence at the very bottom, written in shaky, uneven letters that looked like they took every ounce of courage to form. Help me. Her heart caught in her throat. She blinked, reading the words again. The letters were faint but clear, like someone who didn't want to be seen but desperately needed to be heard. Just below the words, there was a small smudge gray and watery, as if a tear had fallen and dried on the page. Mrs. Alvarez's breath came a little faster. Her first thought was that it might be a joke. Kids sometimes wrote silly things when they were unsure or scared of being wrong. But Lucas wasn't like that. He didn't joke like this. And this didn't feel silly. This felt real. She crouched beside his desk, keeping her voice low and calm. "Lucas, sweetheart," she said gently. "Are you okay?" He didn't look up. His lips pressed into a straight line, and he gave the tiniest nod. But his body was stiff, like a small animal trying not to be seen. Before she could say anything else, the recess bell rang. The classroom erupted in noise, chairs scraping, giggles, kids rushing to line up. Lucas stood up quickly, shoved his chair in, and rushed out the door without making eye contact. Mrs. Alvarez stood slowly, still holding his test in her hand. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And she knew this wasn't something to brush off. She folded the paper and tucked it carefully into her desk drawer. She couldn't forget about it. She WOULDN. Single quotes T. After seeing the children off to recess, she headed straight for the teacher's lounge. The hallway buzzed with voices and laughter, but her thoughts were somewhere else. Back in that quiet moment with Lucas's pale face and those trembling letters, "Help me." In the lounge, the hum of the coffee machine filled the silence. She sat at the small round table and pulled out Lucas's school file from the cabinet. Attendance, regular grades, average. Notes from previous teachers, cheerful, curious, sometimes chatty. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual. But she couldn't ignore the changes she had seen recently. 2 weeks ago, during gym lineup, a janitor had dropped a metal bucket in the hallway. Most of the kids had jumped, laughed, moved on, but Lucas had frozen. His whole body had flinched. Hard, like he'd been hit. His hands flew up, as if to shield his face. Mrs. Alvarez had placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, saying softly, "It's okay, Lucas." Just a loud noise. He had nodded too fast, too much. His eyes wide like he was still bracing for something worse. And then, Just last week, she had noticed the hoodie. It was a warm day, unusually warm for April. Most of the kids wore short sleeves, fanning themselves with worksheets and asking when recess would start. But Lucas had on a big grey hoodie, sleeves pulled down over his hands. When he reached for a book, the cuff slipped back for just a second. She had seen it clearly. A bruise. Faint but undeniable. Purple and yellow around the edges, high up on his small wrist. She had asked him gently, "What happened, sweetie?" He yanked the sleeve down so fast it made her flinch. "I fell," he mumbled. The words came out too quickly. Too practiced now, with his spelling test still fresh in her mind. The pieces were clicking together in ways she didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. Across the room, Mr. Thompson, the fourth-grade teacher, was pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You're okay?" he asked casually, noticing her expression. She hesitated. "Have you ever had a student write something strange? Like, not just silly strange, but worrying?" He shrugged. "Sure. Last week, one of mine drew a dragon eating the principal." She didn't smile. "This one wrote, 'Help me,' at the bottom of a spelling test." That made him pause. "Did you ask him about it?" He wouldn't talk. Ran out the second the bell rang. He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. Kids exaggerate sometimes. Maybe he was nervous, forgot a word, felt overwhelmed. "Maybe," she said, though her voice was flat. "But what if it's not nothing?" She didn't wait for him to respond. Instead, she stood and walked to the wall phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number for the school counselor's office. When Ms. Rivera picked up, Mrs. Alvarez said simply, "I think we need to talk to Lucas. Something's not right." The counselor's office was warm, designed to feel like a safe place. The walls were painted a calming yellow, and there were shelves with books, stuffed animals, and crayons. A soft lavender scent lingered in the air, and a fuzzy rug stretched across the floor where kids could sit and play. Lucas sat stiffly on the small blue couch, clutching a worn brown teddy bear. His legs didn't quite reach the floor. He looked smaller than usual, tucked into himself like he wanted to disappear. Mrs. Alvarez sat beside him. Ms. Rivera pulled up a chair and smiled kindly. Her voice was calm, the kind that made even the most anxious child feel just a little safer. "Hi, Lucas," she said gently. "Do you remember your spelling test?" He nodded, eyes on the teddy bear. "You wrote something at the bottom," Mrs. Alvarez added. "Do you remember what it was?" Lucas didn't answer. He just clung tighter to the bear. "That's okay," Ms. Rivera said softly, placing a box of crayons and a coloring book on the table beside them. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. You can just color." Lucas looked at the crayons but didn't reach for them. His small shoulders were hunched. Silent. After a long moment, Mrs. Alvarez asked again, "Lucas, did you want to tell us something when you wrote those words?" His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I'm not supposed to talk." Ms. Rivera leaned in gently. "Who told you that, sweetheart?" He shook his head, lips pressed tight. "It's okay," Mrs. Alvarez said quietly. "You can tell us. You're safe here." Lucas's fingers twisted the bear's fur. Then, in a shaky breath, he whispered, "Jenny yells a lot." Mrs. Alvarez's eyes met Ms. Rivera's. "Jenny?" she asked softly. Lucas gave the tiniest nod. "Dad's new wife." Ms. Rivera's voice stayed gentle. "What happens when she yells?" Lucas looked down. "She puts me in the closet." The room went still. "The hallway closet," he added. "It's dark. She locks it. Says bad kids go in the dark." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he wiped it away fast like he thought crying would get him in more trouble. Mrs. Alvarez reached for his hand. It was cold. "I don't want to go home," he whispered. She squeezed his hand tightly. "You don't have to. We're going to keep you safe." In the corner, Ms. Rivera stood quickly and whispered, "I'm calling child services." Mrs. Alvarez nodded, still holding Lucas's hand. 10 minutes later, the social worker was on the phone, her voice calm but firm. "We're sending someone out now, about an hour away. Don't let him leave with his father. Mrs. Alvarez's stomach dropped. Lucas's dad picks him up at 3, she said, checking the clock. Stall him, the social worker said. Do not let him take the child. As Mrs. Alvarez rushed to the nurse's office to wait with Lucas, her heart thudded in her chest, and just as she reached the door, Ms. Rivera's voice came through the walkie-talkie. His father's truck just pulled into the parking lot. Mrs. Alvarez froze. The hallway was quiet now, still, but trouble had just walked through the front doors, and the clock was ticking. Mrs. Alvarez stepped into the nurse's office just as Lucas glanced up from the cot. His juice box and crackers sat untouched beside him. His small hands were clenched in his lap, and when he saw her face tight with worry, he sat up straighter. There, sweetheart, she said, kneeling beside him, trying to keep her voice calm and warm. You're doing so good. We just need to wait here a little longer, okay? Lucas looked at her, his big eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name, fear, maybe, or hope, or both. He nodded slowly. Daddy's coming, he whispered, his voice cracked on the word dot. Mrs. Alvarez felt her stomach twist. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, but you're safe here with me. I promise. Just then, the phone on the nurse's desk rang. Mrs. Alvarez reached for it quickly. Mrs. Alvarez, Ms. Rivera's voice came through, low and tense. His father just came inside. Jenny's with him. Lucas's face drained of color. Mrs. Alvarez leaned in. Stay here, I'll be right back. Okay. Lucas nodded, but he didn't let go of the teddy bear. Out in the main office, the air was sharp with tension. Jenny stood stiffly near the front desk, arms crossed, her heels tapping. Impatiently on the floor, Lucas's father, Thomas, stood behind her tall, rough around the edges. With tired eyes and a voice that sounded like it didn't care to wait. We're here for Lucas, Jenny said curtly. Where is he? Mrs. Alvarez stepped into the room. Before anyone else could answer, she gave a polite, practiced smile. Hi there. Lucas stayed after for a little extra help today. I just need you to sign him out before we bring him up. Jenny narrowed her eyes. Extra help, he's 6. It's school policy, Mrs. Alvarez said calmly. Her hands folded neatly in front of her. She felt her heart racing, but her voice stayed steady. Thomas shifted his weight. This is the first I've heard of it. We've never had to do this before. We just updated our sign-out procedures, she lied smoothly. You know, for safety. Jenny rolled her eyes. We don't have time for this. Just bring him out. At that exact moment, the front doors swung open again. A woman in a blue blazer stepped in, followed by a police officer. The badge around her neck flashed in the light. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Duncan, with Child Protective Services, she said. Jenny turned around, her mouth falling open. Excuse me? What is this? The officer raised a hand. Ma'am, we just need to speak with you and Mr. Thompson privately. Behind them, Ms. Rivera appeared, holding Lucas's small hand. The moment Lucas saw his father and Jenny, he flinched. His whole body seemed to fold inward. He turned quickly and buried his face in Ms. Rivera's side. Jenny's face turned red. Lucas, get over here, now. The officer stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. We have some questions. Lucas clung to Ms. Rivera, his fingers digging into her sleeve. Mrs. Alvarez stood frozen, her heart thudding. The rest of the office was quiet, except for the rustle of papers and the heavy tension that hung in the air. The social worker gestured toward the principal's office. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, if you could come with us, please. They disappeared down the hallway with the officer. Lucas stayed behind, still holding tight to the bear. He looked at Mrs. Alvarez, his eyes asking 100 questions. He didn't know how to say. You're okay now, she whispered. They're here to help. The next hour passed like a blur. The social worker asked questions. The police officer made notes. The principal paced. Lucas sat quietly on the nurse's cot, playing gently with the teddy bear's ears while Mrs. Alvarez read him a storybook in a soft voice. Finally, Sarah, the social worker, returned. She crouched beside Lucas. "Hey there, Lucas," she said kindly. "Guess what? I've got some good news. You're going to stay with a very nice lady tonight. She's got a fluffy dog named Buddy who loves kids." Lucas blinked. "A dog? A big, silly one," Sarah smiled. "And tomorrow, some other nice people will want to talk to you, just to understand what's been happening. But tonight, it's just you and Buddy." He hesitated. "Can I bring my bear?" "Of course," she said. "Your bear's coming, too." Mrs. Alvarez packed Lucas's backpack with care. When it was time to leave, she knelt and wrapped him in a hug. "You are so brave," she whispered. "And you are not alone." Lucas clung to her for a long moment. Then he took Sarah's hand and walked with her out to the waiting car. He turned once and waved. Mrs. Alvarez waved back, watching the car disappear down the road. But the story wasn't over. That evening, Mrs. Alvarez sat at her kitchen table, the test paper still folded in her bag. Her husband, Michael, poured her tea and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Rough day?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking, what if I hadn't noticed?" Michael looked at her. "But you did." The next morning, she got to school early. She couldn't stop thinking about Lucas, about how many children might be trying to say something without words. In the counselor's office, Ms. Rivera looked tired but determined. "CPS will follow up, and Lucas is in a safe place now. But this might take time," she said. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "Whatever he needs." Days passed, then a week, then another. Lucas didn't return. His name stayed on the attendance sheet, untouched. His desk stayed empty, but his test paper remained in her drawer. A quiet reminder of what almost went unseen. Then one Thursday afternoon, the school secretary brought her a letter. "No return address," she said, "but it's for you." Mrs. Alvarez opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded carefully. The handwriting was still a little shaky, but more confident than before. "Thank you for seeing me." There was a small Jeringa stick figure holding hands with another one, both smiling. Between them, a bare dot. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes filled with tears. But behind the smile, questions still lingered. What would happen next? Would Lucas be okay long term? What about Jenny and Thomas? And were there other kids, other quiet cries waiting to be heard? One day, the phone rang in the middle of class. It was Sarah, the social worker. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "It's about Lucas." Mrs. Alvarez's heart skipped. "What is it?" she asked. Sarah paused. Her voice dropped. "He told us something new." A chill ran through her. "What did he say?" But Sarah didn't answer right away. "Can you meet me after school?" Mrs. Alvarez looked over at the classroom. The students were working quietly, heads bent over their papers. Everything looked normal. But something was waiting just beneath the surface. Something darker. Something they hadn't uncovered yet. And whatever it was, it had just begun to come to light. That afternoon, the final bell rang, and Mrs. Alvarez watched her students scatter out of the classroom in groups, their laughter echoing down the hallway. She smiled and waved, but her mind was somewhere else, on the phone call, on Sarah's voice, on the unanswered words. "He told us something new." She packed up quickly and made her way to the parking lot, where Sarah was already waiting in her car. As soon as Mrs. Alvarez slid into the passenger seat, Sarah handed her a manila folder. Her face tense. "You need to see this," she said. Mrs. Alvarez opened the folder. Inside were notes from Lucas's latest interview with the counselor and social worker. His handwriting appeared on a few pages, clumsy but clear. There were more drawings, one of a dark closet, and another of a tall woman with angry eyes. "He's talking more," Sarah said. "He trusts us now. But yesterday, during play therapy, he mentioned something that caught our attention." Mrs. Alvarez looked up. "He said, 'Jenny isn't the only one.'" The words sat heavy in the air. Sarah continued, "We thought he meant his dad. But when we asked more carefully, he said something about another boy, a neighbor. He kept saying, 'She puts him in there too.'" Mrs. Alvarez felt her stomach twist. He has a friend across the street, she said quietly, the memory forming. Small boy, blonde, maybe 5. I've seen them walk together to the bus. Before, I never thought. Sarah nodded. We're checking it out. Police have already visited the house next door to Lucas's. The little boy there, Matthew, isn't in school. His mum said he's homeschooled. But something didn't sit right. Officers are investigating now. Mrs. Alvarez closed the folder. So Lucas may have saved someone else too. Sarah nodded. It looks that way. Later that evening, the local news quietly broke the story. Without names or faces, just a brief report. A Child Protective Services team had removed 2 children from a home on suspicion of abuse. An investigation was underway. No arrests had been made yet. At school the next morning, the halls were as lively as ever. Kids ran, laughed, clutched lunchboxes, and waved at teachers. But Mrs. Alvarez walked a little differently now. With every voice she heard, every paper she collected, she listened more closely. She paid more attention to the small things, the quiet ones, the ones who stayed behind after recess, the ones whose eyes lingered on the floor too long. 2 weeks later, she received a letter in her mailbox again. Neat handwriting. A stamp from a nearby county. Inside, a note from Lucas's new foster home. The foster mum, Sharon, thanked Mrs. Alvarez for everything. She said Lucas was doing well, sleeping better, smiling more. He had made a new friend at his new school. And yes, he played fetch every evening with a very clumsy dog named Buddy. The letter ended with a small drawing. Lucas, a big dog, and a bright sun, and beneath it, in blocky letters, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Mrs. Alvarez pressed the paper to her chest. She sat back in her chair, staring out the classroom window as clouds drifted lazily past. It wasn't the kind of story that made headlines, but it mattered. It had changed a life. Maybe 2, and that was enough. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment. One quiet voice. One brave sentence scrawled on a piece of paper, "Help me," and someone willing to listen. Because listening, truly listening, can save a life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, the smallest voices often carry the biggest truths. Thank you for watching.